I've been involved in quite a few Magento 2 migrations over the last several years, and the majority of them have actually gone very smoothly, not a lot of problems. But there have been a significant number of Magento 2 deployments that have hit some real problems with keeping the Google traffic that they had before the transition from their previous e-commerce platform, whether that was on a different platform or Magento 1. And as they moved on to Magento 2, sometimes some balls got dropped and some of the traffic got lost. And sometimes the results of these problems have been substantial, actually. In a couple notable cases, a few merchants have lost more money on lost revenue because of declines in Google traffic. Those losses cost them more than their entire Magento 2 deployment project cost them. So getting this right is really important. And I just wanted to raise some issues and elevate the conversation in the community and see if I can give some tips based on some of the experiences we've seen with some of these deployments that have gone right and some that have gone wrong. So I've been involved in the Magento community now since about 2008, I suppose. And back then I was working for a Magento merchant where we actually went through one of these Magento 2 site launches a few years after that. And since then, I have worked at Psyberware, and Psyberware is a digital advertising agency. We specialize in advertising for e-commerce merchants. So we get involved a lot in issues relating to Google traffic, conversion tracking, shopping feeds, analytics, all that sort of stuff. The agenda for today is we're going to first look at some issues that can impact organic traffic at a site launch. And then we're going to look at what I think a lot of people don't pay attention to, and that is how site launches can affect paid traffic. And finally, we're going to wrap up with a few thoughts on analytics and conversion tracking and how that can also impact your traffic coming from Google. The main issue that merchants have to deal with is there are typically a lot of content URLs that change when you're moving from one platform to another. And this is even true if you're moving from Magento 1 to Magento 2. Some of the most common patterns are that maybe products used to be under categories in the URL structure in the past, but we're moving the product URL up to the right off the domain. Or perhaps we had .html on the end of URLs in the past, and we're removing that because it's not really necessary. Simple issues like adding or removing slashes on category paths, you don't think about that as being a different URL, but just one character being different, like a trailing slash, results in Google treating that as a new URL. We typically move category structures around quite a lot when deploying a new site. It's a good opportunity to clean up some of the crud from the past. So moving an old category name and renaming it to a new category, or changing the hierarchy of category paths. And finally, a lot of site launches do something fundamental like adding or removing the www from the domain name. And in cases like that, you have to think about every single content URL on the site changes in that case. Google's guidance on how to handle this is to use a server-side 301 redirect on every piece of content that moves. This ensures users and search engines are directed to the correct page. And it tells Google that the content has permanently moved, so it should update the index with the new URL. And one of the more important points with this is this tells Google to pass the page rank to the new destination. If the page was indexed highly in the past and you don't give a 301 redirect to tell Google where it is now, that content can look like new content that's getting indexed from the start and doesn't have inbound links directing to it. The 301 redirect is necessary to pass that link juice to the new destination. 301 redirects are really simple. It's just a simple part of the HTTP protocol where the user requests a URL. In this case, it's product.html. The server responds and says, nope, it's not here anymore. It's moved permanently. Now it's at just product, no .html at the end. And then the user web browser will seamlessly and quickly resubmit a request for the content at the new location. In order to set up redirects like this, and to truly get it right, you actually have to have a comprehensive list of all of the valid URLs on your site, and you need to audit that against everything that might change. That can be a huge task on a big e-commerce site with tens or hundreds of thousands of products. Getting that list of URLs can also be difficult, because what is the absolute list of all URLs that are potentially valid on a site? It's complicated. You can get clues out of Google Search Console. You could look at your own sitemaps that are automatically generated depending on your previous e-commerce platform. If you're on Magento 1, you're moving to Magento 2, you could construct all possible URLs using the URL keys from the database fairly easily. You might have a WordPress blog integrated with your site, in which case you might have a completely different system to pull URLs out of. And oftentimes those are overlooked and dropped on a site move. Various SEO tools can also help you find all your valid URLs. And don't forget about web server logs. They have a lot of CRUD in there because they're going to have requests for all sorts of URLs that aren't valid on your site. But all of the valid URLs that are actively serving to anybody are also going to be in there. I would recommend you actually write some automated tools so you can quickly as you can do it with tens of thousands, but so you can quickly run a test that can check all of the URLs and see what codes are returned. That way you can rerun that test when the site launches. And then immediately at launch, you want to do that. You want to check all of your URLs. And here's the thing, you're going to find new 404 errors that you didn't think about every time. There's going to be something that got overlooked. And all of those 404s are URLs that used to work that need to be redirected to where the content is now, or where the closest substitute for that content is now. You need to set up 301 redirects as quickly as possible. If you're already in a situation where your site has launched, or if you're just going forward through time, the best place to get information about 404 errors that you should create 301 redirects for is Google Search Console. The coverage reports contain lists of all of the URLs that are excluded from Google Search because of various issues. And the 404 report in Google Search Console is just a gold mine of information about what Google knows about, what Google used to crawl and potentially have indexed, or what external sites are linking to on your site, but that is now generating an error. All of those you should look at and just go through, make it maybe an ongoing process to review every month, in fact. But really think about looking at that report on an ongoing basis to make sure that you catch all of those errors and send users and Google to the right place. A few more issues with organic. A lot of times on a Magento 2 site launch, with all the other things going on, people forget to set up the sitemaps. You need to generate that sitemap.xml and configure Google Search Console to read that, because there may be new content on your site and you want to get indexed as quickly as possible. SEO extensions. There's a lot of common SEO extensions for Magento 2. Sometimes SEO extensions get installed in Magento 2 and then not actually configured properly. So make sure that you don't just think you're going to get some SEO benefits by installing the extension without configuring it. In fact, misconfigured SEO extensions are one of the more common problems causing Google to drop pages out of the index. Another thing to think about is legacy redirects. Your old e-commerce platform probably had a lot of redirects from products or categories that were moved around over time. If you're going from Magento 1 to Magento 2, you're probably importing all those. But if you're coming from a different platform to Magento 2, you may want to really look at what those redirects were on the old platform and consider which of those URL redirects you should bring forward. Because again, remember, they're passing that page rank to new destinations of new content on your site. Remember that Google is not going to crawl all your pages overnight. It takes a lot of time, and on a large site, it can take weeks. And that means you won't know about some issues for several weeks. And then if you fix them, it'll take several more weeks before Google crawls them and fixes them again. That lag in Google's crawl speed is what causes a lot of problems with that initial drop in organic search traffic. So consider that if you are having some of those issues, you might want to increase your paid search budgets, at least for a few weeks after the site launch, in order to make sure that you've got listings on top value keywords that you know are generating sales. Moving over to some issues with paid search. Most of the issues on the paid search side that cause traffic drops have to do with problems in the shopping feed or shopping campaigns. One of the biggest issues is when merchants decide to change their SKU numbering at the site launch, or do something else that causes the IDs in their Google shopping feed to change. Google is very clear that you need to use stable and unique IDs for products that never change and are never reused in the future. This graph at the bottom is a graph of daily traffic coming from Google Shopping campaigns from an e-commerce merchant that migrated to Magento 2 last year. You can see a pattern of 4 weeks in a row of good normal traffic, and then you can see the day that they launched their new site with changed IDs, a different SKU numbering pattern for all their products. And then after working on that and fixing the problem, the traffic was able to come back up again after reverting to the previous SKUs. The problem with IDs changing is Google loses the performance data, or whatever bidding tools or automated bidding you're using loses the performance data about how products have performed in the past. And it's going to tend to result in you buying fewer of the high profit clicks and buying more low profit clicks and completely messing up the spending patterns of what's been working for you in the past in your shopping campaigns. If you're changing your SKUs and they're non-numeric, an easy way to handle this is to just make another Magento 2 attribute. Call it the Google Shopping ID, or call it the old SKU, whatever you want to do. And when you're generating your Google Shopping feeds, instead of using the new SKU, use the value of that new attribute that you've created. Just set that with all the IDs from your old site. If you then add more SKUs in the future that are new to your company, you're not going to have that field set, and you can probably just use those new SKUs going forward, as long as you're certain that they're never going to overlap any of the values that were used in the past. So that can be the challenge. If you have numeric IDs, the overlapping ID issue comes up a lot. So here's a simple example. You used to have a Magento 1 site, but over time you added a lot of products, but some of them were permanently removed and you don't sell them anymore. Now, perhaps you've migrated that data into your Magento 2 database, and as you did that, they were all assigned new Magento 2 entity IDs. The numbering pattern changed. So since a dog bowl is your new entity ID 2, and it used to be entity ID 3, you need to do something like setting up a Google Shopping ID to record the value of that for your Google Shopping feed going forward. But then what happens when you add new products at the end? If you've compacted your list of products down, new products are being added in the same numerical range as old products. And you get issues with ID overlaps. So you have to have some method of resolving that. An easy solution to that is, if you're migrating to Magento 2, start your entity ID numbering higher than any of the entity IDs you've used in the past. And then you can still preserve old IDs, but then any new IDs that get added down the road in the future are automatically going to be outside the same numerical range. You'll never have issues with collisions. There's a few other ways of handling this. And depending on what e-commerce platform you're coming from, there might be some more nuances that are a little bit complicated. For example, on BigCommerce, product variants aren't required to have a SKU, and they have entirely different IDs that aren't the same numbering scheme as the main products. So you have to do some extra steps to work this out based on how the data actually looks from your old platform to your new platform. When you renumber all the IDs in your shopping feed, it causes problems with display ads. Display ads, or products as they're browsed on your site, are going to fire information over to the advertising systems with the ID of the products being looked at. And the problem is, say you're doing that in a tool like Google Tag Manager. Google Tag Manager doesn't have access to the full product data. They're going to have the entity ID in the SKU, because that's being fired over to Tag Manager in the data layer. But they're not going to have everything. And unless you want to do some more complicated programming, there's actually an easy solution for this. That can be added to Google Shopping feeds, called the display ad ID. The display ad ID isn't documented in the main shopping feed specification. It's instead documented in a list of optional fields that can be used to support display advertising. But it's easy to set the display ads ID to your Magento 2 entity ID or SKU, and then it simplifies the process of matching browse products to potential ads that will be displayed to people down the road for dynamic product remarketing. Be really careful if you're using category-based bidding. So for example, the product type attribute in a shopping feed is usually set to a category path, the category path from your e-commerce site. That same path can then be mirrored over into the bidding structure of a shopping campaign inside Google Ads. If you've got structures like this in place and you're in the middle of an e-commerce platform change and you're moving those products to some new location, some new category structure, the products are no longer going to align with the bids that they used to get in Google Ads. This can cause issues. It can cause some serious issues with suddenly massively overbidding on products if they get lumped into the wrong container. It can also result in products getting bid down because they don't match anything, and maybe you have some default catch-all that bids 1 cent on any products that aren't in one of the other bidding categories. So again, this has been a major issue that has affected quite a few merchants in the past with just things they didn't anticipated about how the Magento data is going to drive decisions inside Google Ads. With all of the focus on fancy new front ends and PWAs, and a lot of merchants really want to put a lot of work into custom themes, it's causing more problems with Google's landing page price policy. The issue is Google says you have to clearly show the feed price on the landing page, and it has to be the most prominent price. If you're doing some fancy rendering on those front end pages and Google's automated testing can't determine what the price is and easily parse it out, then you're going to have pricing policies that are going to kick all the products in your new store out immediately as soon as Google crawls their pages. So consider doing some extra testing just to make sure that Google can parse those prices as you're going through your development process. And a good tool for that is Search Console's Rich Results Test. You can use that to parse your product pages on your test site and just make sure the prices are being parsed correctly. And finally, about Google Shopping ads, remember that all your shopping data is going through Google Merchant Center, and Google Merchant Center has a mechanism to verify that you are really the owner of your website by putting a file on your web server that they're going to go ping periodically and check and just make sure it's there, or they're going to look for a header, they're going to look for linking to analytics, and so on. If you're using the HTML tag or the HTML file in order to verify your site, when you migrate to Magento 2, you need to make sure that that's carried forward. Again, overlooking this is a common problem that results in new site launches immediately losing all of their shopping product data. On the tracking side, there's 2 key issues. One is that tracking problems can make it look like you're losing traffic when you're not actually losing traffic at all, or they can misclassify things. The other is that if you have any problems with conversion value tracking, it can cause automated bidding algorithms to think that the performance is worse than it used to be, turning down the bids on profitable products. And that results in an immediate loss of traffic and sort of a death spiral of less and less bidding and less results going forward until you fix it. One common problem with new site launches is if you're changing your payment methods around or adding any new options, and if any of those result in transferring the customer off the site to a payment processing portal, and then they're transferred back. By default, analytics is going to see them coming back from the payment processing site, finishing a transaction, and they're going to credit that transaction to a referral from that website. In cases like this, it's really easy to solve. You just have to add these sites to your referral exclusion list in your Google Analytics property configuration. Once you do that, it will then correctly attribute those sales to their original source. 301 redirects can also make search traffic look like direct traffic. So what really happens is when a redirect when somebody comes from Google search and they hit a redirect like that product.html page, when that's redirected over to the product page, the referrer on the second request for the destination page is going to change to being the first page. So it's going to look like your own site referred the traffic to your own site, and it loses the knowledge that Google search referred the original traffic. The thing is about this is it doesn't really matter because this is just a temporary issue until Google recrawls your site and updates all the URLs in their index. And after that, they won't send traffic to 301 pages any longer. Problem solved. 301s can also break conversion tracking. And that's because the way most people set up redirects, they're redirecting the base URL and not any optional parameters on the end of the URL. So when a click comes in from Google, there's a GCLID parameter on the end of that with a big, long, unique string. That maps that user back to the original ad click for purposes of conversion tracking and analytics. Now, when that hits our 301 redirect, typically that GCLID is going to be lost, and the second request for the destination page is going to be without that. So you can make your redirects actually pass that data. It's a little bit more difficult, though, in some situations. It might be a little harder to get your admins to configure that for you. But the simple solution here is to just audit all of your ad landing pages and make sure that none of them land on any pages that are going to redirect. So you can run a simple link checker to check all of your ad landing pages. And if they go through a redirect, update them. And finally, I'm going to wrap this up with just a couple thoughts on our latest tracking challenge. As privacy laws are getting more complex, a lot of sites, as they redeploy Magento 2 site, are putting something like this up. If you continue to use the website, you consent to our use of cookies. Pay close attention to how these systems actually work and consider what you are legally allowed to do and what you're not legally allowed to do and how that's going to affect everything. These systems frequently just break the link coming in from the advertising system and the ultimate purchase. And if we can't track that conversion value back to the original advertising link, advertising click, it's really hard to optimize your advertising towards increased performance, and it results in a lot of bad decisions. Since different jurisdictions have different laws here and different size businesses may be subject to different rules, it's hard to give any clear answers that are appropriate to everybody. But just pay close attention to this if you're adding new privacy systems to block some tracking, personally identifiable information, cookies, any of that. And just make sure you know how that's going to work all the way through. So, final thoughts. Check everything. It's hard to even boil this down to a list of what things you should check because there's so many little details that can go wrong, so many nuanced scenarios that can cause issues. But the ones I've covered here are the big ones that we've seen over the last couple of years. Make sure you're using proper redirects for all of your changed URLs and really make sure that you're paying attention to ongoing 404 errors going forward and fixing those. Be really careful if you're changing shopping feed IDs. That's a killer. It comes up a lot. Make sure Google can parse your product pages, especially if you're doing anything fancy with complex product types or complex JavaScript on the front end. Update your ad landing pages to avoid redirects. That's probably the simplest solution to the conversion tracking problems there. And just double check all the conversion tracking, especially if you're doing anything privacy policies that are going to be auto-applied to block cookies. And above all, don't worry if a little bit of the organic traffic looks like it went away. It might just be hiding in direct traffic. So go look there and see if you got a bump in direct traffic after you did your site launch. That's probably just some misclassified organic search traffic. And with that, I think I'm going to open this up for any questions that may have come in. But stay in touch. If you got my email up on the screen, if these slides would at all be useful to you, feel free to reach out. All right. So, do we have any questions? Hey, looks like we don't have any questions. Check in the chat. All right. All right. Well, thank you all for joining today. I am really happy that I was able to present on this topic because this has been kind of important. And man, we've seen some real interesting Magento 2 site launches in this last year. I want to make sure that the ones going forward are all good, so everybody has the information about what goes wrong. All right. Thanks so much. I'll see you all at the event later on today.